Welcome to the Grappling Grappling Rewind Podcast.
Welcome to this week on the Grappling Rewind Podcast. On this week's show, we are going to recap the Ocean BJJ event that took place this weekend. We are also going to talk a little bit of news. As always on the show, I'm your host, Maine, my co-host,
Miranda.
How you doing, Miranda?
Pretty good. How are you?
Doing pretty good. We just spent a couple of hours going through Ocean BJJ. It was the first event. I think we've covered similar events from them before, but I think this is the first one that we've covered under this name.
Yes.
It was fun. There were some big upsets. We have a lot of questions about some of the scoring and the rules, but we're going to run through that. Should be a pretty short show. So before we do that, let's talk a little bit of news. We have the IBJJF crown that is happening, I think November 17th or something like that.
Yeah, something.
We have two names that have been announced for that already. It looks like we have like 4 or 6 divisions that Flo is kind of putting up that. But right now we have 2 names. We have Gabby Pisana, 8-time world champion, and Melissa Couto, 2-time world champion in the women's super heavyweight bracket. Currently, those are all the names we have. The crowns are really good. Again, we've had some kind of broadcast issues with them in the past, but overall, we love that IBJJF does have some pro events that they put some money into and that they pay the athletes to compete in. Again, I wish they would do more of it, so I'm happy that they're expanding the crown to more divisions.
Yeah, it's sort of funny the way they the article reads, though, because the article reads like
On Flow.
On Flow is like, here's our full brackets for the crown, and then there's
the article
names.
is titled like all of the crown entrants, and it's we know it's one of the articles that Flo makes where they do it for ADCC as well, where they have basically a running list of everyone's been announced so far to give you a centralized place. But it's very funny to title the article full list and then it being literally 2 names. So it was just funny. It's again part of grappling sports is us.
It says a full list of the competitors at IBJJF's 2024 The Crown, but then there's 2 names.
Just 2 names. So we thought it was funny again. That's something very frequent that we do when we pull kind of news is stuff like this. So we just wanted to bring it up. It's gonna be a quiet show this week, so just wanted to bring that up. It's funny. Let's see. I don't think we have anything else. And last week was the culling of IBJJF titles due to steroids.
Yes.
And I don't think anything else. We haven't seen anything else that has happened since then.
I haven't seen any other names.
Speaking of news, not really news, but I'm not sure if it's old or if it's a little newer. I listened to it this week. The Simple Man podcast. Some of the guys from B Team, Damian Anderson, Ethan Collinston,
I think it was released.
And Nicky Rod.
I think it was released this week because normally it populates in my Spotify as soon as it's released. And it was this week that I listened to it.
So it is basically a behind the scenes of CGI with Seth Belial, which is basically the co-owner of B Team along with Craig and the other folks that co-own B Team.
And they kind of explain the emergence of the B Team.
Yeah.
And how they got the gym and all that kind of stuff.
It's if you are interested in any of the guys from B Team in general, but if you're interested in sort of a curtain pullback from some more of the pro events, how the pro events happen, how sort of everything for CGI came to be, it is a really fascinating podcast. I think it's like an hour and a half or 2 hours, something like that. It's a pretty in-depth podcast, and it's just Seth talking about, running it, the Fair Fight Foundation, how they got everything in order, the time frames for it, like him building production teams.
Yeah, and how he had to kind of situate everything because they did something that once they said it, I was like, oh, that was a smart idea. Was they had all the printed like labels and everything on the mats that they used for CGI. They had it done in production when it was made, so they're not stickers. Because in MMA fights, I don't know how many times I've heard people bitch and complain about when they add stickers.
Slipping on the logos.
To vinyl, how it becomes the slick spot that everybody slides in when they're on there.
And he gave Craig a lot of credit for like competing in a lot of pro events and going, look, we got a bunch of sample tests done for the pit and for the alley. There was issues in production, but we produced it. So basically, and Nicky Rod brought it up where he loved the surface because basically the alley, and this is something new that we learned, it was mats, and then they had a layer of canvas over the top of them like they do in the UFC for like any other MMA style organization where it's that like grippy canvas material, but you said they had the logos made like printed into the canvas so that they weren't slipping. It was it is one of the many kind of things that we got information about CJI that made me go, oh, they really considered a lot of like how the athletes are going to deal with that and did a really good job.
And I enjoy the behind the scenes, like the crazy, like this is what we had to do because like as he's talking about that, he's like, yeah, and I knew I needed X many of money. X many weeks to get it done. And he's like, so I had to do that before I had to like get the athletes because it needed to be started before this. And then he was talking about like before Craig even said online like when it was going to happen and everything, he had to go and get all the legal shit like straightened out.
Oh, the paperwork and book the venues. Didn't tell Craig the venues.
Yeah.
It is a
and like he had
fascinating-
to hold stuff back from Craig so that Craig didn't know what was going on.
So he couldn't release it publicly.
Yeah, because they were afraid of like, and they did, you know, seem to have some problems with other people trying to block their event and stuff like that. So
it was cool. It was a really, again, if you listen to this show, you probably are interested in sort of the behind the scenes of a lot of how the sausage gets made for jiu-jitsu and for pro events. Again, I'm fascinated with it. It's one of the drivers for us doing the show for the last almost 8 years now. And I've really enjoyed it. So it was a really cool insight and look into what it takes to sort of run an event like that on like a 1,000-mile scale from the guys that did it in 3 months. And it was cool. It was really, really interesting and enlightening. And again, they talked a little bit about CJI 2, which after hearing Seth talk on the podcast about that, I'm really excited. I'm really excited that we are going to get it potentially every year now. We're going to see more divisions. Like they seem to have even heard some of the kind of complaints that happened in the first one, and they're going to make improvements. Like it, I am very excited to see where the CJI goes. I even think that they're gonna like they'll change the nuance of the rules a little bit. I think Seth's rationale for why they used MMA style rules is really good, even though they're not my favorite rules personally. I think his rationale on the podcast of discussing like why they chose MMA rules because it pulls the audience in and it's designed to make it bigger.
He seemed to have a lot of good ideas and good rationale for those ideas, and at the same time not be like so hell-bent on getting certain things that he isn't able to kind of change them and allow for like it to be more fluid.
Really, really good stuff that we like to hear from promoters running events because it is indicative of like positive changes being made in the future and not like this is what we do, this is what we've always done, this is how we're going to do it.
And they made comments like saying how, you know, at one point they were thinking about giving show money to certain people and giving more money to certain people to show up, and then they realized how like shitty that seems all around. So
it was really funny them talking, not to cut you off.
No,
it was really funny to have them talk about some athletes like, how about you give me $100,000 now and I win, you only give me 9, and they were like, no, we give you
we
give you $10,000 and that's your show money.
We can almost tell you like who that probably was too.
Yeah, there's a couple.
If you think about it, you're like, I know who that is.
I think it was also really funny about just the realities of, you know, dealing with Craig and dealing with kind of the media machine that Craig is in himself. And like they were getting sponsors for the event, and they were talking about having to convince the sponsors that it was going to be a real event. It was fascinating. If you've heard us talk about,
and I know for a fact, like within our little Grappling Rewind chat, for a minute, it was like, is this actually happening?
I mean,
do we really need to, like, is this really going to be a real thing?
I wasn't certain it was really going to happen until they announced that they had booked T-Mobile.
Well,
like
and he said,
not T-Mobile, the Thomas and Mack.
Yeah. Well, he said he didn't want to release that ahead of time either because he was afraid that
they were going to get blocked.
Yeah.
He was going to step in. Yeah, it was fascinating, and I'm so happy that they did it. And it was a pretty casual podcast too.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It was kind of the highlight of my week for stuff that I have listened to this week. If you've heard us talk this much about it, go and listen to it. It was fascinating.
I think their podcast's hilarious. Truthfully.
It's really fun. They give a lot of insights into the pro side of the sport that I think is way more public than a lot of people realize, and it's pretty neat kind of get those peeks behind the curtain that sometimes we're privy to or not privy to. To hear those guys just openly kind of talk about it, it's neat. I like that it demystifies a lot of the things that you think or don't think go on behind the scenes.
I also think it's kind of funny because initially I think they were releasing the episodes like pretty regularly, like right after they kind of recorded them, and now they have like a delay so that if somebody's competing, like it's not going to show until after that competition actually happens.
Sorry, my wife there's a window above. My wife just walked by and made hard eye contact. It threw me off for a second.
I was like, what the hell?
Yeah, no, he just looked down at me and I was like, okay, so that's news. Go listen to the podcast, Simple Man episode with Seth Belial on it. Wildly insightful, tells you a lot you want to know about Craig Jones Invitational this year and potentially for future events. I will absolutely go to Texas or Vegas if they run it again.
Yeah.
Like I'm amped. It was fun. I think they said they sold out 70, not sold out. They sold 70% capacity in like 2 months or 2, which is crazy. And cool.
Now they only did like the half circle. They didn't do the full circle.
Yeah, it was. I think it was a little more than half. I think it was the exact same layout that ADCC 2022 used, which was slightly. It's like a three-quarter.
They did make that comment when I think about it. Yeah,
and it was a 3/4 bowl, which is kind of what you want because then you leave the other side of it for like production and walkouts and other stuff.
Because we joked too that some of the layouts they were using for ticket sales were the same layouts.
Yeah, that was really funny.
We literally
looked at it and was like, "That's the exact same layout." Hey, but again, if it works and you did it, you have already run an event like that. Like, that makes sense. So let's move into this tournament. This was the Ocean Pro BJJ event. We're gonna cover this like it's the first time that we have ever seen it because I think the previous one we've looked at,
I think it was,
maybe we covered on the show or maybe we didn't.
I think we did, and I think it was Super Fights, and it had a female that she was at 1FC for a minute until
Michelle Nicolini.
Yeah, I think she was on it.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think who else was on it. It was a couple people. But I think it was a super fight event. I don't think it was. It was a tournament because it was the one.
I think we've conflated two of them together as well. But
because I think there aren't a ton of tournaments out of Sardinia.
Maybe it was just another event out of Sardinia. So
anyway,
regardless, it was a fun event. I'm gonna openly say at the beginning of the segment here, there were a lot of broadcast issues. I kind of want to talk about them at the end because I try not to like lead with that. I don't think it's that fun to talk about, but for this event, it is something that I think is important to talk about because it did affect our ability to actually like watch and cover some of the matches.
Yeah.
Most of them have been parted out individually to flow, which is great. But there are definitely some like very apparent broadcast issues in the first hour and a half of the event. And then throughout the other matches with some of the camera work. So we'll touch on that later, but overall the matches were fun. We talked about it last week in the preview for this show, but this was basically a tournament where each division, the over 80 kilogram division and the under 80 kilogram division, had 4 big names that got put into it, like 4 invites. They were special guests.
Yeah.
You had like Tara Kopstock, you had Luccas Lira, Luccas Lira. You had Marcin Held, you had Tommy Langakker, like Tara Kopstock. You had 4 people per division, and then you had Ocean BJJ Pro had run a qualifier, and it was basically an over 80 and under 80 qualifier.
They ran a couple qualifiers.
They ran a couple of qualifiers to field the rest of the athletes. And again, we talked about how much you love that. I love that they do that. In the final tournament, we had a couple people that ended up in both divisions.
Yeah.
Notably, Pawel. We said this a lot on the pre-show.
Pawel
Jaworski.
He's Polish.
He was Polish, and Miranda on the pre-show was like, I bet he knows Polish Mathiesen.
And then I realized, it's a whole country.
I was like, I told you, I was like, Miranda, it's an entire country.
Dude,
and then
one day I want to go to Poland and be like, I need to find him.
Just text you. I want to train with you, Szczynski. So Polish grappler, and he was in both. There were a number of other athletes that were in both. Actually, specifically, the women's champion, Gamila Kanu, won both the lightweight division and the heavyweight division. I think there were 2 4-women brackets, but she won both of them on Ocean BJJ Pro. And so again, I like that Ocean BJJ Pro goes, hey man,
if you want to do both,
you want to win both,
go
do it. It's a neat little wrinkle, but again, it gave an opportunity for some of these athletes to come in and go against some of the top people in the world, and it was super neat. I love that they did it.
And I think what they also did for some of the matches, or some of the because this was finals, and I think there was even another tournament that was done prior to this one where they actually took some of them. They either did that or they did pigtails.
They had pigtail matches. And if you look at the big bracket for the event and some of the results,
they did pigtails.
I think Jits Magazine, again, shout out to them, man. They always have the best formatted results in the game, and they are who we use, and I love how they format their results. They are a savior on the show so many times. They had the pigtail matches like listed out. So some rounds you won't have a round of 32. You'll just have a couple of matches from that round.
Yeah, but the pigtail matches, they were they didn't win the trials, but they had a really good showing at the trials.
Yeah.
So they let some of those spots be filled by those people, which I think is also fun because like if you're in, let's say you're in under 80 and you're not, I don't know who won it, but let's say Pawel. Is it Pawel?
Jaworski.
Jaworski. You're not Jaworski. And you went against him a bazillion times. You know he's going to footlock you or do whatever he's going to do to you. And you like murder all of your guys up to him, and then he kills you in finals or in semifinals, like you still did an amazing job, and it doesn't mean that you couldn't, do better.
You couldn't have upsets. You couldn't beat him one day. Yeah, I like that. So, for anyone not certain, pigtail matches mean basically additional matches outside of the bracket that if you win, you go into the bracketed slot. So if you have, for instance, a 16-person bracket and you have 19 or 20 competitors, 4 or 3 of those competitors will have initial matches in to make it into that slot of the bracket.
And when you look at the bracket, it looks like a pig, the animal tail.
Like a little curly tail.
Because it has, it's like off the side of the bracket, which is why it's called
pigtail
a
match
pigtail.
or a pony match.
Yeah.
Are the 2 terms. I don't know why they're both listed as animals, but that's what they're termed as.
I wonder why they're called a pony match.
There's a I know the reason for that one, but I can't come up with it right now.
Okay.
So do I really know it? So regardless, it was fun. I want to talk about we have kind of, there's a lot of matches that happen here. We're not going to go through all of them. We picked some of the select matches that we found the most interesting for various reasons. We're going to run through those. These are, I think, the matches that I saw that I wanted to talk about because I thought they were the most interesting for either a storyline perspective or like a big athlete in the tournament or a person that we didn't know about as much taking out a big name.
Yeah.
But the first one is just a quarterfinals match in under 80. Tara Kopstock defeated Alessio Sanchetti via toe hold. This one was neat because it's not a toe hold we see very often in a pro event.
Yeah, but we see them more often than not.
We see them a lot.
They're starting to come up a lot more.
Yeah, we see them a lot. It's just something we don't get a chance to cover very commonly on the show. It's a reversed close guard toe hold. Yeah. Which I think is hilarious.
Do you guys have anybody in the gym that does reverse close guard?
Yo.
Oh, are you you're the master?
I'm not the master, but I'll go there and football and
but there's always someone.
Yeah, there's always we call that guy some asshole that comes in. I'm like, I'll play reverse close guard on you.
Ours is our coach.
Yeah. So, reverse close guard, basically it's reverse mount.
Yes.
One guy has mount, and then you lock your legs around. You can do it doubled as well, which is really hard. But if you have reverse close guard on someone, from the bottom, they're essentially mounted on you, and their legs and their knees are on the ground, and their legs will come and their feet will come right in front of your face.
Yeah.
If you were so happen to grab a toe hold grip on them, essentially you can't tack out or rotate through. You only have your other free foot to try to fight the hands.
Yeah.
And it's actually a really, really hard toe hold to get out of. It's a little bit hard to finish because you can kind of stand out of it a lot of times. But if you have someone like Hopstock, who is a very, very good submission hunter,
and if you lock it on really fast, if it catches you off guard, it's very difficult to I've even been taught how to get out of the position, and I still get caught.
You were talking about, like, you did a seminar with J. Reg Labudo.
Yeah.
He kind of taught you about it.
He went through it, and I was like, yes, we need to know this.
It's a neat position. You don't see it very often. It can be a really stally position if someone knows how to kind of hide their feet here and prevent the toe hold. But it's not a toe hold we see very often. It was cool to see Hopstock hit this on Alessio Sanchetti in the quarterfinals. So it was neat. I was like, oh, look, it happened. And we get a chance to talk about it.
Yeah.
So next match we have
it was pretty nasty. Like if you watch the
you brought the slow-mo up on Instagram.
Instagram has the slow-mo, and you watch the foot, and you're like, ugh. mean, it's not as bad as a meow foot, but it's still bad.
It's not like Hamilo Bahal and Patrick Gaudio bad, but it's definitely like you can see the compression of the foot. Like, ooh, that looks really tight. Yeah. So that was that match. Other match that we wanted to talk about in the quarterfinal. I think we have actually 4 matches here to talk about in the quarterfinals of the under 80 kilogram bracket. We have Pawel Jaworski defeating Espen Mathiesen via heel hook. And we thought this was really interesting because you looked it up and you said this is only like Espen Mathiesen's second pro no-gi tournament.
Yep.
Which is...
The first one was like Polaris, right?
Yeah, recently. For some reason, I think he's done trials. For some reason, I think he did ADCC trials back in the day or has done it before. But
that's not pro. That's amateur.
It's kind of pro. It's like, it's trials.
But you're not making money for it.
In the U.S., you win money.
Oh, true.
U.S. trials winners win money. I don't know internationally if they do, but regardless.
A guy on Reddit agrees with me that this is a second.
A guy on Reddit agrees. Like the ultimate source for news and factual information. This was a neat. So there were some broadcast issues with this match. It was very hard to see.
Yeah.
We watched it a bunch of times. I hope a better angle comes out of this. It is very hard to see what happens.
It's hard to see, and the other thing is there's like it's 5 sub attempts almost in a row that ends in this heel hook.
Yeah.
Like it is a lot going on and a lot of like arms and legs that you don't really know who belongs to who, kind of, and it's like it's a pretzel. It's a man pretzel.
So Pawel goes essentially false reap on the same side leg on Espen's leg that Espen is passing, because Pawel has been pulling in most of his matches. He wants to be on the bottom. He wants to pull. If you look at his qualifier matches, that's kind of what he does as well.
Yeah.
Nogi European champion, purple belt. Good.
I think he's a brown belt now, because I looked at like he has the purple belt one at the top of his Instagram, but he has a couple pictures in a brown.
Okay, so brown belt now.
So I think he's a brown belt now.
Does a 50-50. There's an entry. And then Espen does a great job. He like sits to his butt, and then essentially Pawel keeps this, and it's not deep half quite, but it's almost in the same position when someone tries to sit across you.
I think it's considered waiter guard.
But it's not really a waiter guard, because the other hand isn't up. I play a shitload of waiter guard, and like this, it is sort of in the middle of it. If I would see this when somebody sits down above your head like this when they have the leg, I always think of that as like a deep half sweep, because if somebody's playing deep half on you, you never want to sit your butt or your hip to the mat, because they get to sweep you from underneath. It's just like it's sort of the thing that you don't do with a good deep half player, because they will tilt you and be able to get you up if you sit down on them.
You know, what's wild is he's also a multiple-time world and European UWW medalist. Which means boy knows how to wrestle. He just chooses not to.
Decides to sit. So after this entry, we have Espen trying to counter it in a really interesting way, basically trying to go to a choi bar off of this position. But Pawel does a good job of like keeping his arm in enough.
And he doesn't let go of the leg.
He doesn't let go of the leg. That's the key thing here. It's like the arm is getting attacked by Espen, but if you let go of the leg, then Espen can actually push you far enough away. Because Pawel has the leg still, Espen actually can't get his body far enough up to continue to attack the arm. And then he almost gets a triangle. He's close.
He's close to a triangle. That's the level of crunch that is on him, because Espen has the arm as he has the leg. Like I said, it's a man. It's a man.
It's very pretzeled.
But
a triangle is basically a leg in triangle. When you triangle someone and their leg is in the triangle,
and their leg,
triangle.
Yeah, it's called a triangle. You basically make their knee touch their face. But that is kind of like the crunchy up position that they're in.
Because Pawel's leg is next to his own head in this position. Espen can't pull it out, and then Pawel tacks down. The camera angle changes and makes it essentially impossible to see what's happening.
So we're just going to say he then teleports to the leg.
That's kind of what that's literally like that's the frame we see is him basically on a backside 50-50 entry into the heel hook and heel hooking Espen Mathiesen. Kind of close to the edge of the mat where it's really dark and hard to see. But wild transition to counter off the Choi bar into that from the full sweep entry. It was neat. I really hope that there is a better angle here that comes up, because it's a neat transition. It's just very, very hard to see.
And the thing is, I also hope that in the future they light their mat a little bit better, because as it was lit sort of enough, but not really for the broadcast in the center, when they went out of bounds, they would go like off into the nothingness. Yeah.
This is the same thing that happened with the crown. For one of the first IBJJF crowns was like, I can't see anything on the edge because they didn't light it well enough. I'm like literally looking at the dark.
It's not the one I went to, right?
No, it was the year prior, the last crown.
I went to the one that was pretty decent.
The previous crown and the previous one had they were both super dark.
Yeah.
So that was that match. That's again a huge win for Pawel. He takes out both Espen and Tommy in this tournament because he's in in both divisions. So next round we had Tarek Hopstock. We're back into under 80, and this is when we got a little confused about some of the scoring. Sorry, not this match. This match makes sense in the scoring. Yeah. But the broadcast seemed to be a little bit confused with the scoring, and Tarek Hopstock gets 1 point for essentially like a belly down to the side, a steamer lock in transition, and that wins him the match. Just a lot of hop stock on the bottom, a lot of Pawel trying to do something on top, but not really being able to do much, and then that one really good footlock attempt from Hopstock. They kind of move the points around from an advantage to a no advantage, and then to a point for Hopstock.
But I don't think they're doing advantages in this.
No, but they're using that flow overlay, which is terrible. And we've talked. Well, again, I'll save it to the end of the show. So Hopstock beats Pawel here via this one cross-side Aoki steamer variation.
And the way this tournament does their points is that each submission attempt gets a point. Sometimes. And each action, meaning like guard, pass, sweep, mount, back, they all get a point also.
Yeah. So it's like, which is fine from a scoring perspective. It's just each Polaris does it too.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
Where it's like everything you do gets a point, which I think honestly from a scoring perspective is fine. Like it's 1 point versus 2 point versus 3 point versus 4 point. Like ADCC, the points are smaller. IBJJF, they're a little wider. I kind of think 1 point for everything at a pro event is fine because usually the margins are pretty slim anyway.
Not a lot's happening. And that way you actually increase the action because you don't get those like 20-point matches.
Cool. I take you down, pass your guard, and get a mount. I'm up an insurmountable amount of points now, and I can just camp you. Versus like, cool, you get 2 points. Like, okay, you can come back from that, especially if submissions are on the table. We didn't really see it for any of the matches that we're going to talk about today, but I actually kind of like the 1 point thing. It's very easy to follow for it. But so Tarek takes out Pawel Jaworski in the. Sorry, I've missed.
I think it's semifinals.
This is semifinals.
It's semifinals.
That's why I moved the note around a little bit because I made the notes this week and Miranda didn't, and not formatted nearly as well.
I had to ref and be a bad ref this weekend.
We're good. You're always a ref. Moving on, this is the last match we're talking about in the semifinals for under 80 kilogram division. Fabiuri Christinian. He's another qualifier. He's a really good brown belt we've talked about for a while. Probably going to move in to be a very successful black belt on the IBJJF scene. He submitted Marcin Hell with a heel hook. This was a fun match up until the end. Honestly, Marcin is one of the most dominant submission fighters when he was in the UFC.
Like MMA submission fighters.
Yeah, MMA submission fighters was really fun. We've seen him in Polaris. We've seen him on Fight Pass Invitational. We've seen him on Quintet. Super fun, always goes to the sub. And this match was no different. He was ripping stuff off of Fabiuri. Fabiuri was countering, and eventually kind of the sequence that ends this whole thing is they've been in 50-50 for a minute, and Marcin goes, okay, I don't want to be in 50-50 with this guy anymore. I'm going to try to like tech out of 50-50. And it was like watching 2016 matches happen again, where Marcin makes the decision to go, cool, I'm going to pull my leg and tech out of the position and kind of reset. And Fabiuri isn't teching out of the position and then gets to heel hook Marcin on the pull from the leg.
Yeah.
It was just such a like, yep, this is sort of why in a lot of matches at the pro level, why nobody will get out of 50-50 is because the first person to exit 50-50 loses. Unless you are Wagner Hosha and JT Torres. Go back and watch that match if you ever want to see a masterful performance of getting in and out of 50-50. Their fight to win match in 2022 was like 2019 or 2022, right after one of the ADCCs, was one of the best matches ever if you want to see like how to get in and out of it. But that's basically what happens is Marcin goes to pull his leg out and Fabiuri just can counter heel hook him on the inside.
Yeah.
But up until then, it was a really fun back and forth match, non-scoring, which I thought was really interesting because
they had some locked, but they had some deeper submissions. And there were no scores.
Yeah, so this is between a couple of the matches, I got really, really confused about the scoring. They even had a scoring video that they showed earlier in the event, but there was some of the names were on top of the broadcast as it was happening. There was a lot of production events here. I couldn't exactly figure out why no points were scored up into the match, but again, it ends in submission, so it's not really a problem. But it was very hard to follow. It was impossible to follow how everything was being scored. Yeah. In the finals of under 80, we had Tarek Hopstock defeating Fabiuri via decision. I'm going to talk about it now. This is essentially the same match as Tommy Langakker versus Pawel Jaworski, where not a whole lot happens, and it's Hopstock on the bottom and Fabiuri looking to pass.
Yeah.
And
they give it
Hopstock wins.
Yeah, and they give it to the bottom player, though they don't put any points up, and they don't really explain why, and it's hard to figure out why.
Yeah. It seemed inconsistent. It seemed a little consistent here and there, and then also, yeah, it seemed inconsistent across the event what the actual scoring criteria in these. They're close matches either way.
In some matches, you feel like they're counting the submissions, and or submission attempts, and in other matches, it seems like they're not counting the submission attempts, and I don't understand the difference or why.
Yeah,
that's what's happening, and some of the decisions in the big boys are the ones that I'm like, with the
context of under 80, it's like we maybe should have done over 80 first, because a lot of those problems kind of crop up
the problems
first.
start coming up in over 80, and I think they ran over 80 first, right?
Yeah,
they ran.
I just decided to cover it. We just decided to cover it in reverse order.
I watched this like between training, driving to New Jersey, and reffing yesterday. I watched some of this. So I remember I saw heavyweight, and that was like towards the beginning of the card.
So Hopstock wins this. Again, I don't really have any problem with any of the decisions on the card. A lot of the matches are very, very close. I think it kind of highlighted...
I sort of do, but...
I think it sort of highlighted either inconsistencies or issues with the rule set, that some of these matches were kind of able to be so close, where it's like you have a sitting guard player or a guard player on the bottom, and a top player that's kind of unable to get around the guard, and that's able to be the entirety of the match.
But then you need to then score the entire event as
I agree.
The bottom player,
IBJJF does it, where it's like guard player wins.
Yeah, like and if you're gonna but if you're gonna do it, if you're gonna play it that way, then all the matches need to go that way, and your athletes need to know that.
Yeah,
because you act a lot differently if you know that's going to be the way.
If your guard player is given precedent in a dominant position, there it was odd. For this one, I didn't really have a problem with it. You had some problems. I don't really have any problems with how this one went.
This one I don't have any real problems with.
But it was event wide in the same event. Yeah. It seemed inconsistent.
My
it was
problem
very confusing.
Is the next match we're going to talk about.
So let's move on to the over 80 kilogram division. We had Pawel Jaworski defeating
again.
Yeah, again in both. Defeating Langakker via decision. I don't have honestly a ton of notes in this match. This is Pawel pulling guard, and then playing a really, really in tight elbows in, like defensive sound, like what's the term for it? Like it's a bug name, I think, where it's like you're super close, you're super tight, you're playing off your back, your knees are close to your chest.
Ladybug?
There's a bug name for the guard he plays, and it's very, very hard to pass, especially if you're the smaller guy.
Yeah.
And a bigger guy's on top of you. Like Mikey plays a lot versus big guys. It is incredibly hard to pass. Langakker spends the entirety of the match kind of at range trying to pass it, not really getting much done. Pawel doesn't really get much off.
He doesn't really get anything attached to him, but my issue with this one is if we're going with submission attempts or a stronger position or like almost like advantages, as you would say with IBJJF, I think that Tommy actually got further trying to pass Pawel than Pawel trying to attack Tommy.
Correct. I saw the same thing. It was. Sorry,
but then they give it to Pawel, and I don't understand with looking at the other matches how that even happens.
Yeah, it was odd. I don't really have much to kind of expand on that because it was just sort of confusing. It was again in a vacuum. I don't really have a problem with Pawel getting this decision. Like it was both guys. I think Langakker was a little more aggressive with the passing, but Pawel played a good guard the entire time and like.
But if you think about it, like I am normally a top player, and if you're a top player in this tournament, and you think that you're passing attempts and that activity. You know the weight of submissions. So you don't want to get him close enough to you to allow a submission attempt on you. You want to pass, and you get to 3/4 of a pass or almost passed at certain points, and he doesn't get any submissions on you. You don't try to do anything crazy because you're winning. Because
I've done the pass. The bottom player now has to do more work to get subs. Yeah, it was. It was confusing how it was scored.
So I can see how he kind of didn't turn on the gas because he didn't have to, or he didn't think he had to. But it was just, for me, that was weird. And then there's another one that's weird too, which I'll.
It was close. Pawel gets it. It was close, but a huge upset. And again, a great win for Pawel. It was close.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the quarterfinals. We had Pedro Diaz defeating Pawel Jaworski via armbar. This was neat. This was kind of a very different approach than what Langakker took versus Pawel.
Yeah.
I keep butchering. It's Pawel, and he's Polish, and I tend to struggle with Polish pronunciations until I hear it a bunch.
Jaworski.
So Jaworski plays, again, a seated closed guard, like almost like a butterfly guard, sort of, but never really allows Pedro Diaz to get close enough. Pedro Diaz tucks down to his knees and plays a lot of this match from his knees, whereas Langakker played much more on the feet and much more at range.
Yeah.
Pedro Diaz goes, cool, man, I'm going to be right in your face here and not let you get under me.
Well,
and then
but Pedro's also the bigger. I don't know how much time or how big Tommy was for this tournament. Pedro was definitely more imposing as an individual,
but he wasn't enormous. I mean, but he's definitely bigger here. What I liked is the kind of the difference of approach. You got to see Pawel beat Langakker, and then you got to see Pedro kind of take on the same problem and address it so differently, and really force Pawel or Jaworski into a different kind of way that he had to play the butterfly guard. And basically Pedro Diaz starts to pass, forces almost to the north-south, and forces a regard from Pawel, grabs the underhook on the regard, and then cuts the angle and beats Pawel in the regard to get the armbar on the top side. Which is like it's a classic thing you teach as a counter to the north-south regard. But it's not something, it's one of those things where it's like, you're taught it once, and then it comes up occasionally because this happens. You see a guy hit it, and everyone kind of goes, all right, I got to start punching the underhook there and cutting the angle when they go to regard, if they're going to be flat on their back in the regard, or you can force them flat on their back in the regard because they need to get their legs in front of me. It's something that, honestly, I think we should see more often, but we don't see it hugely often. And every time we see it, I'm like, oh, that's a really cool transition to counter the north-south spin back to the guard. And then we see it for like 6 months, and then we don't see it for another year. So
it's similar to also to like what you teach when somebody goes to knee, like if you go into knee on belly and the person doesn't really know how to get on knee belly correctly, and they open their arm right there, and you spin around an arm bar. It's that
where they flare when they try to push you off knee on belly, and you just bump. It's the exact same arm bar, the cross side spin.
Because a lot of people don't get out of knee on belly correctly, and they open up their arm.
And then
only because
you take it.
I just literally taught that to a blue belt on Saturday.
Oh, that's
I was
funny.
like, hey, you can do this.
But that's kind of where you learn it. Is like, cool, you know how to go out now. You learn how to get out better, or learn when they do something wrong, how to capitalize on it. That makes sense. So that was fun. It was, again, a neat dynamic shift to see. Oh, Pedro Diaz is going to address this guard and this competitor very differently than Langakker did, and has success in it. So let's move on to the semifinals. We have Luccas Lira defeating Pedro Diaz via submission, via heel hook. Luccas Lira looked good in this tournament. In his earlier match, I think you said it was like, 34 seconds or something?
He had like a 22-second match.
Yeah, where he just basically jumps the Kanebe Besame, the scissor leg takedown, and just into heel hook.
Actually, I think he had a couple. Like, I think he had a couple, like...
he had a couple quick ones early that we were like, okay, cool. Versus, like, trials guys that we were like, okay, we'll watch them, but we're not going to put a ton of time into the matches on the show because there's just so many matches for this tournament. This was cool. There's 2 entries. There's the first entry on Pedro Diaz that Luccas Lira hits.
Dude, it's freaking wild.
I want to talk about, and then we'll talk about the finishing sequence, is basically Luccas Lira grabs the single leg. And it's like, okay, standard. Pedro Diaz makes the space, gets to kind of the end where Luccas Lira just has sort of the end of the calf and the shin and the foot kind of, where you don't have it deep in. You're not like running the pipe on it. And Pedro Diaz is pointing the other way, starting to do a running man out of the position. I'm like, okay, this is neat. And then Luccas Lira, normally, there's a couple things you can do here. You can run the pipe, but usually you're going to lose this position. Like, you pull the leg out far enough where, unless you were a very good wrestler or a very dynamic player, you're going to lose this position. Luccas Lira goes, cool, man, I'm going to jump my backside leg over top into a cross, like, backside 50-50 entry and go for what normally is an outside heel hook, an inside backside heel hook, or a lot of people will actually roll this into a knee bar.
Yeah.
And you saw
it's wild.
It was
it's
You
fun.
took a video of it. So
I
you could,
took
like,
a
break
video
down.
of it.
It was super neat. This match is worth watching for this sequence alone. Is the camera angles right? Like, we had some problem with the camera for this match for the event. This camera angle is perfect. You can see everything, and you can see almost the wheels turning in Luccas Lira's head of like,
he's like, oh,
I'm gonna rip it.
I got a leg. I can jump on it.
So he jumps it over. He doesn't get it. He tries to turn into a heel hook. He doesn't get it. And then later in the match, you can see him he makes a transition over into just a more standard heel hook off of this. But this was a dynamic match and a fun match, and it is really cool to see kind of how fervently Luccas Lira is hunting the submission throughout this entire tournament.
And you also think about Luccas Lira has a ton of competition experience.
Oh yeah,
like
very seasoned competitor.
He does so many IBJJFs. So many.
He's very much like a young athlete on the grind. And now, like, he has Grandotti, his wife is Maggie Grandotti, who also has a phenomenal amount of tournament and competition experience, knows how to put together a camp, knows diet and nutrition, and like seems to be, and she was in his corner, seems to be very involved in her husband's competitive career as she's kind of sunset her competitive career and like really putting everything into her husband's career.
She did Master World.
She did come back from Master World. I think she's done with adult competition.
Yeah, I think she's gonna like do things here and there, which is good.
But again,
scary but good.
Yeah, terrifying because Grandotti's very terrifying.
Because she's gonna be in my weight class.
Whoa. Yeah, cut the weight, Miranda. We were interviewing her. I think she was in Kasai. She was in really, really high shoes. I think in that match, like, she's like above me.
Yeah.
When when I'm interviewing her.
I don't need that. I really don't need that smoke.
But really cool sub. Again, Luccas Lira defeating Pedro Diaz via sub. There were a lot of subs in this card, which was good. And then we move into the finals. We have Luccas Lira and Sebastian Rodriguez.
This is another match that I do not like the decision of.
This was, I mean, I have no problem with Luccas Lira winning. I think based on the criteria for the rest of the tournament, it is an odd decision. It is surprising to me that Sebastian Rodriguez does not get the win here. Because so goes full time. Goes to judge's decision. We have Sebastian Rodriguez playing on the bottom.
Yeah, pulling guard and playing on the bottom.
And going for leg locks.
And going for attempts. And getting attempts. Like getting in. But
getting way closer than Pawel got on any of the attempts.
But no points.
And again, I don't think there was nothing that he got that was like an imminent submission, like he's about to finish it.
No, but the ones that they got points for before weren't.
I think the only one we saw we talked about was Hopstock. Hopstock's one looked super deep. Pawel, but again, it was like, also he's facing the wrong way from us. The camera's face, it's hard to see.
But like, also Sebastian gets his head a few times, and like, there are a couple times where I'm like, he should get something for that. Like that is deep enough that, and he never like goes deep enough into, and maybe he doesn't go deep enough into it to really lose position because he holds on to it and then he goes back to whatever he was doing before. But he definitely has the attempts.
And then Luccas Lira has two big moments. Three big moments. He has two decent pass attempts that he doesn't get past Rodriguez. He probably wouldn't even get an advantage for, but he's pushing activity early in the match. And then in the last, 20 seconds of the match, Rodriguez temporarily stands up. Luccas Lira kind of double legs him at the edge of the mat, and they reset out of bounds
into the dark,
into the darkness, and then
it's like a Hunter Colvin down the stairs, double leg.
Yeah, and then the match ends, and it goes decision for Lira, and so. Based on the criteria and the other matches that we saw where the top player, even a far less active bottom player than Sebastian Rodriguez, like Sebastian Rodriguez in the last 2/3 of this match is actively hunting and looking and forcing Lira to defend. Lira's trying to counter back take off of it.
Normally that's the criteria you look for when it comes to like assessing a point for a submission attempt.
Yes.
Is defense. And Lira had to defend.
Yeah.
He was put to his butt, and he had to defend.
Our fight to win rules for decisions for submission attempts is you score a submission attempt when it is a submission that requires defense from the person being submitted. And these all, 3 or 4 of these into the legs from Rodriguez required some sort of active defense or countering from Luccas Lira. I think 2 of them were like, okay, Lira identified the submission early enough where he looked to counter, so it's like, you can may not score that. But 2 of them was like, okay, Lira is just moving to defend out of this heel hook or out of this knee bar or out of this toe hold. Like Luccas Lira is like moving his hips and body away, and he's not necessarily looking to counter this leg lock. He is looking to defend to avoid getting his foot ripped off. And then the decision goes for Luccas Lira here, and it was like, okay, I really don't understand the criteria of what we're looking for if you look at all these matches in aggregate.
Because if you use the same criteria for this match as you would the Langakker match, which didn't have as much action but had a similar kind of dynamic to it.
Yeah.
Then why didn't Langakker win?
Yeah.
That's my own thing. Like, if you're going to, and you know, I've been around enough tournaments, I've seen enough tournaments where like CGI was a good one, where we had a set of rules, and then when we actually watched the matches, it was a little bit different.
Like Pat Downey and Luke Rockhold. That was the one where I was like, do I really understand what their criteria is here? I'm confused.
It was a little bit different when you got to the actual match, which I understand. Sometimes it's a thing where you have to like teach, and it's a teaching experience for your refs, but
especially with new events, and it's the first time that they've been run with this rule set on this stage.
If you're going to do that, then you should at least stay with the same rules
for the event. It was confusing. Again, I'm happy Luccas Lira won. I like seeing Luccas Lira. I hope he,
the matches were fun to watch.
High submission rate. I mean, overall it was fun. Again, but let's talk about it. When you have a bunch of qualifiers versus a bunch of like established pros,
you're gonna get
the first couple matches are a lot of bloodbaths, which is fun to watch. But also, it's a great opportunity, regardless, for the athletes that are coming up to get an opportunity to take a shot at these big games.
You got Jaworski, he was I think a brown belt, who, took out some heavy hitters.
Espen and Tommy, like both the Norwegian guys. Like
now, Espen, we do have to caveat that like. He is
still a pro.
He is a pro, but he's still newer with
high-level
no-gi jiu-jitsu. So he doesn't, when he still runs his bolos like you would bolo somebody in the gi, which leaves your leg right.
Did you say to someone on Reddit say it? Like, we need to send him to Australia for 6 months.
It was on Reddit that somebody said they need to like kidnap him and send him to Australia
for 6 months. God, that'd be crazy. Because he has all the other he actually plays a game that is not dissimilar from a lot of the ways that Lachlan constructs his guards.
But a lot like Polish Mathiesen.
Mathiesen, same kind of way, yeah.
Again,
it was a very fun event. There were a lot of technical problems. The first hour and a half of the event it looks like a broadcast encoder is having a glitch issue. The camera work looks like it's been done by a lot of cinema people that don't really understand how to film jiu-jitsu, where it's like there's a lot of matches where we are right on the back of the athlete and it's fooling the entire screen. Like, hey, I can't see any of the hand position, any of the leg position. There's a lot of...
It might be that it was a bigger... it could be a frame thing, too.
It could be a lot of issues.
You know what I mean? It could be where they didn't back out of the frame when they
or your preview screen for your camera isn't actually a broadcast crop screen or something like that. Or the audio was pretty good, but the event was very dark. The broadcast, I'm going to even say after the first hour and a half, where there's a lot of technical issues going on, they sorted most of that, the choppy stream, they sorted most of that out. Very dark, and they kept cutting to the coaches during big moments. I never want them to ever cut to a coach.
But I think that's also maybe having production people that don't do jiu-jitsu.
That's what it looked like.
You know what I mean? Because
we've seen this before for events.
Yeah, because if you know jiu-jitsu, you know when something's about to happen. And you would know not to pull your camera away.
Yeah.
If you didn't know jiu-jitsu, you might be like, okay, I'm going to film this for 5 minutes. And I'm going to look over at the ref, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to,
Yeah, I'm going to keep it active and move around versus like, hey, that camera should be here so we can cut. There were a lot of also quick camera cuts around that made the action hard to follow during sequences.
But some of the production for this event were awesome.
Oh my God, it's great.
The website with the water.
One of the better looking websites we've seen has clear rules. It's laid out, has athletes, have events like this. Go look at their website for how to construct it.
Even the rules video that they have, which is dubbed in English,
is great.
And explains everything.
I mean, it's one of the better rules videos. It's like, it reminds me of ONE FC's rules video. Where it's like, it's very clear. It's very professional. The event looks great. And then the broadcast.
And even there, it might look amazing once you're there. It's just...
from the flow side, when we were watching, there was a lot of tech issues, and it was very, very dark, and there was too many camera cuts, or there was too many like times where they would cut to a coach. Like, for any broadcast folks or any people listening to this show that have made it this far that want to run an event, one thing to always make sure it's bright enough so I can see all the action. If they're on the edge of the mat, I need to be able to see the hands. I need to be able to see what the person is doing. Second thing.
I will say, even as a ref, like, and watching other people ref and do jiu-jitsu tournaments, I'm always surprised, like, as I'm reffing, I'm watching hands and feet, and that's how I like watch matches. And especially if I know something's about to happen, like I walk a lot when I compete. Like, I almost spin circles or ref. Yeah, I almost like spin circles around competitors.
I do the same thing,
and it's because I'm constantly trying to see certain things, and I don't know if that's just something that some people don't immediately assume, or if that's like a knowledge gap that some people have. I don't know, but.
The second thing on broadcast, like seeing the match, seeing the hands during the match, never cut to anything that is not the match. Like, Flow does this sometimes. A lot of events do this where it's like, oh, let's get a crowd shot. Like, nope, you can do a picture-in-picture. Like, you can give me a coach cut in on the corner cam, but like the UFC during a fight never then cuts to the corner while the fight is happening. No. Like, that doesn't happen. That'd be like a football game where a play is happening and they cut to the coach. Like, that doesn't happen. Never cut away from your scoring action ever. Don't ever do it for any reason. If you're going to do it, pause the match for some reason. Something's happening, you need to film, like, oh, the fight breaking out. Pause it, like, see it. Never cut away from the action ever. Use that secondary picture-in-picture mode or camera, or key it in, or do something, but have the match broadcast. And also, if you are going to do picture-in-picture mode, don't do what Flo does sometimes and have the coach be the primary thing and the match be the tiny thing. Always have the match be primary. So just a couple of things that were like just made the event very hard to cover. Again, all the matches are up. You can go back and watch all the individual matches we parted out. I think only 2 of them we talked about here have like significant broadcast issues, but I hope they do fix some of that, because initially it was very hard to watch, and there were a lot of issues in how some of it was filmed that just made it very hard to follow. It was unfortunate because it was a great event.
Guess what?
What's up?
Jaworski is an up-and-coming Polish grappler that trains at Academia Gorilla with Mathiesen.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Mathiesen is the Polish dude.
Yeah, I was jiu-jitsu. Like, they also had like brackets that were like inside-out brackets.
Oh, that was weird. If you look at the brackets for Ocean BJJ, not to shit on them. Again, the event. These are some of the. I enjoyed a lot of the event.
Yeah, these are some of the weird stuff that we pick up on.
The brackets were the reverse brackets, so you had all your front seeds in the middle, and then the lines went out and up. Go find the bracket on their website, because it's there.
It's on Instagram.
Yeah, it's on Flow as well.
It's on their website.
They have like the you can see it and you can trace like, but it's a really odd way to do brackets. In the actual event, I love before all the matches they had the full bracket layout. That's phenomenal.
And they had the normal bracket layout. They didn't have like the inverse one.
I wish they would have used the smooth comp overlay, not the Flow overlay, because looking at the names just looks terrible. The Flow interface is the worst interface in sports. Like the Flow grappling broadcast that IBJJF and that Flow uses if you don't have your own broadcast is the worst thing in stream. I wish that events would stop using it. They were running the event through smooth comp. Please just use the smooth comp overlays. They are so much better. Flow grappling needs to get it together with whatever dumb, bad broadcast overlay that is, because
they use the track.
It's terrible.
Or not track.
The
they
Flow
use
Arena.
Flow Arena.
And it's terrible. Because you see like a last name, like for this one it was .hopstock all lowercase. Yeah. The scoring was wrong. It looks terrible.
Well, and that's just
use smooth comp. Smooth comp has a professional looking overlay,
but that's somebody being lazy.
It just looks so terrible. Like Flow needs to get it together and fix that overlay, because it's looked bad for years.
Does the same thing. Like the person has to type in sometimes the names and everything.
It's terrible. Like we have the tech now. Use smooth comp. They're not that expensive if you're running they have a beautiful broadcast overlay. As someone that like has looked at running events, and like we've looked, and we've worked a lot of events. I've done commentary, done coaching, we've done reffing. Like in most sides of events, we've had a part of production in some way. Just use some of the tools that are already existing that are working really well. That's my spiel. So now before we get into the wins,
but it was a fun it was a fun event to watch. It showed a lot of, like, we saw Jaworski, we saw some other gentlemen. I keep on wanting to call him February, but
Fabiuri.
Marcin, people that we generally don't see a lot on the U.S. cards. Pedro Diaz.
Yeah.
We might see him every once in a while, but not regularly. So it's always good to see like newer people.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
So also this week we had Fight to Win 260. It was headlined by, that's all I got, Ocean BJJ. Again, I hope they run another one. I hope they tighten up some stuff because it's so close to being like a premier level organization, and they're so close to it. Fight to Win 260 happened. It was headlined by James Krause versus Morgan Bracken. Fun match. Again, James Krause, former UFC fighter, good coach, takes a decision win over Morgan Bracken. Activity, passing attempts, and then a late triangle right at the end that he doesn't get, but he wins a decision on that match. And then Fight to Win 261 is happening next week. I think next week we're actually going to talk about the ADCC Open that's coming up because we have a kind of a lull in pro events coming up, unless I'm missing something completely. We'll get a chance to actually run through probably the absolute division or some finals divisions, depending on what names we have for the ADCC Open. So should be a lot of fun.
That's a fun thing to do.
They're fun occasionally. Do you have anything else going on this week, Miranda? We went to the outro of the show.
Are we on the outro?
We are on the outro of the show. It was a quiet week.
Oh, wow. I reffed last night. I made some shitty decisions. So if you were there, I'm sorry. Not shitty decisions. I just reffing is a lot harder than it seems. And if you don't do it for a while, I forget how difficult it is. Yeah. And I've reffed 2 weekends in a row. Both events were long. Both events were a lot of stuff going on.
Very
and they were a lot different
events, rule set wise.
Rule set. And but what was fun was I got to watch. I got to be not a main ref, but like one of the ones that made sure that
corner judge.
That dude didn't shove his head through a wall kind of deal on a match that was Kyle Myers, who's like a local kind of regional black belt that does pretty well at the finisher circuit, and Jose Soto, who is a MMA fighter out of Marquez BJJ. And I got to watch, they were the finals match. And it got super quiet and they were talking shit to each other and everything. And that was fun. So I got to watch this absolute tournament last night at midnight. That was, for $1,000, which is always fun.
That's awesome in a local event. Again, I love competitors getting paid. I love to see it.
Yeah. So besides that, what do I have going on this week? I go to Oklahoma for a couple days this week. So that'll be fun. Yeah.
I'm not going back to the woods for a while. I'm very happy that I'm home. I have no business travel and work travel planned for the next couple of months at least.
Yeah,
And so my wife is very happy with that. She's like, yeah, you left for too long. I did not like that. And so I'm like, I'll be home. I was out in the field last week for a week as well for most of the days. So I'm very happy to be home and just having a more normal, regular schedule. I'm back to coaching at the university because the university is in session now. And
that's cool.
That's always fun to have the influx of new 18 to 20-year-old college students as you kind of more hey, this is jiu-jitsu. This is what we're doing. All right. Do you want to roll? And they're like, yeah, sure. And it's a lot of work, but it is very fun every year.
Well, I did a ladies class today at a yoga sort of yoga jiu-jitsu spot that some of our friends hold, and it was the same kind of thing. It was newer jiu-jitsu people. A couple people have been around for a while, but newer people. And I'm always just so you know, jiu-jitsu is weird. I'm just going to start you with, it is a weird sport before we start anything else. Because especially with ladies classes, women sometimes are what the fuck are you asking me to do?
Yeah.
Because it's not really things that you would generally be you're going to put your head now into their stomach and push forward. That's not something you generally tell people. But I find women are a little more
off-put by some of that.
Off-put by some of it and some of the closeness that needs to be done.
About half our club is women. And so it's a spiel I give very, very, and also it's a mix of college-age women, college-age men, and it's every 19-year-old man thinks they know how to fight. And I have to give the spiel to the women hey, if they're training super hard, talk to them and tell them not to do that.
Yeah.
And it's just very funny to watch, and it just kind of bring people into jiu-jitsu, and it's very funny. Happened this week. People have a more traditional martial arts background. They're do we bow? They're no man, I'm none of that. I'm here to teach you how to do a sport that happens to be a martial art. We're doing a sport. You're not going to bow to me or line up or do any of that. This is a coaching.
That happened too because I filled in at the gym on Friday. teaching like points because everybody's doing grappling industries, and for some people it's their first ever points tournament.
Oh, that's funny.
And so I was teaching like just points in general and like point scoring. And they all like went, like when we started class, they all went and like lined up, and I was like, dude, you don't have to line up for me.
No, guys,
we're not gonna play this game.
Like people, we set the mats up in our club, and then students will like wait there. I'm like, no, I get what are you doing? Like we don't do that here.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, man, I'm just a guy that teaches you jujitsu, and I'm a sports coach in the club.
We don't do all the.
We're not gonna bow to me. We're not gonna line up. We're gonna run a club practice, and I respect all of you to do it. We're not gonna. I don't introduce any of the weirdness of martial arts. You guys are all educated students in college. I'm not gonna do all this other stuff that our affiliation doesn't do anyway. So it's always really fun to have their look like, oh, you're like a normal person that's reasonable. I'm like, yeah, man, we're just doing a grappling sport. Have a good time.
Yeah, you're not like sensei.
No, that's always weird. Like
Sensei Maine.
What do you want to call me? Like Maine. Like if you need something, you go Maine, and that's what I want. Like that's the environment that I want to cultivate in the clubs that I run. And I'm very fortunate enough to be in affiliations and in rooms where that is how the room runs, and it's fortunate. So if you if you don't have that training environment and you want it, push for it. Yeah. So that's all I got, Miranda. Anything else going on this week?
I don't think so. That's about it.
As always in the show, I'm your host, Maine, my co-host,
Miranda.
We have the Grappling Miranda. Say that what it is. Stay safe. If you like the show, please consider sharing it on Facebook with the folks at your gym. It's the best way that we grow the show, and we really appreciate it. You can reach out to us on email.
We also have Instagram. We have Facebook. We have Twitter. We have Google+.
Until that shuts down.
We have a website.
If you have an event you would like to have us cover, please let us know. If you have a name, like most people do, and you'd like to have us stop butchering it,
let us know.
Reach out to us. The show is also available on YouTube, Spotify, in addition to iTunes and every other podcast service. We very much appreciate your time, and thank you.